Hello my darlings and welcome back to my channel. For those of you that are new here, my name is Miranda and I am the Enchantress of Avalon. So I do want to start by noting that I am just using natural sunlight today because I was lucky enough to have a day that has the sun shining through my window. I hope it's not too dim and I hope it doesn't fluctuate too much throughout the course of this video. But I just couldn't see having an overhead light on when I have sunlight. Anyway. Now, as I'm sure you've seen by the title, I am discussing one of my most beloved topics, and that is the May Queen. And I'm going to be talking about, of course, the Avalonian May Queens and a little bit about that honeyed fertility energy of Beltane and how the May Queens intertwine with that. But of course, gonna start out with my usual little updates. As most of you who are familiar with my videos will know, I also do have a business, White Rose of Avalon, where I do tarot reading services and Fairy Queen online classes. So if you're ever interested, that's always linked down in the description box below, as as our blog posts from my blog on the same website as my business, because it all grew out of the blog. So you can pop over and look at that if you're interested, and just in tons more content. I have over 1,500 blog posts at this point because I've been doing this for years and I post every day. So yeah, consider maybe subscribing to my blog as well if you want just more of this kind of content. And for exclusive content that goes a little deeper, I also have a Patreon, Avalonian Rose Fairy Mysteries, which is a Patreon fairy mystery community and mystery school. And you can join that at one of my 3 tiers. I have a $3, a $9, and a $13 tier in the description box below as well. And oh, last update is that on May 1st, so on Beltane actually, I will be starting a Beltane special tarot reading service, which will be a Celtic cross spread and an oracle card pull from Seasons of the Witch Beltane Oracle. I actually have it behind me. Let me grab it. This oracle deck, which is gorgeous. Its entire series, I believe all 8 of them are released now. I personally only own and use the Beltane and the Samhain oracles because those are my favorite holidays. That's why we're doing this video, because I love Beltane. So it will again be a Celtic cross spread and then a pull from that oracle deck focused on the energies of Beltane. What is coming into fruition for you? What is growing? What is fertile within your life? And of course, you can have more specific focuses, but the basic themes, I'm going to be tapping into the energy of Beltane for you. And if you're interested, again, that'll go live on my website on May 1st, and it will only be available for the month of May, of course. Now, let's get into talking about the May Queen. So, as I mentioned, the May Queen is a fairy queen, several fairy queens actually, and falling into the Celtic Venus. I talk about the Celtic Venus a lot. My last video was about solar fairy queens in the Celtic Venus. This one is about specifically the May Queen. And there's crossover because one of the Avalonian May Queens is Rhiannon, who is also a solar fairy queen. The other 2 major Welsh, Celtic, and Avalonian fairy queens of May are Blodeuwedd and Guinevere, which can be said to have solar associations themselves due to their flower bride status. So May Queen, flower bride, Celtic Venus, there's a lot of overlap. Now, to be considered one of these, you don't have to be considered the other, because Celtic goddesses and fairy queens are very shifty, misty, liminal. They embody so much. It's not ever cut and dry as, oh, this is the goddess of fill in the blank thing, and it's only one thing. The Celts loved a very complex goddess who would embody a lot of things. The gods too, for that matter. But yeah, that's the beauty of working with the Celtic Venus, is there's so many different layers to it. I see all of the Celtic Venus goddesses as being fairy queen goddesses, because a lot, if not all, Celtic goddesses begin as fairy queens. They are fairy queens. You know, the fae aspect of them is always there. A lot of people like to think of it as, oh, they're demoted to being called fairy queens and it's disempowering them in some way. I don't think that's true. That's not ever the impression I get from communing with them and working with them. To me, they always were fairy. They always were fairy queens. The other world is the fairyland. But they got simplified into being just fairy queens and had the true level of their divinity hampered down in later writings because, you know, the church was monotheistic and didn't want to acknowledge the divine feminine. There's a lot of reasons, but it's the evolution of the way they were written about. However, I don't think we could ever not link them with the Fae realm at all because of this intensely otherworldly association they have. It's my experience. If you think of them as goddesses first, who were then demoted to being fairy queens and having that fairy energy coming in later, that's your interpretation. That's how that energy appears to you. As with everything of the Celtic folklore nature, there are a lot of different ways to interpret it. We, after all, don't have primary sources written by actual Celts because the religion was orally passed. Memorization and orally discussing it and passing it in that way was a part of the religion. They, in many ways, believed that to write it down would lose some of the magic of these stories. You wouldn't have to remember anymore if it was written down. So the memorization was part of how powerful these stories are. And we see that carrying on even after it does get written down by Christian clerics and everything. In any case, that was a big deviation from the core of this video, but it does set us up for how misty and liminal the idea of a May Queen is. Now, we often hear like the May Queen be applied to someone filling that role in a festival, and certainly that's also a thing, although it's not in Midsummer. Midsommar is a great movie. Don't get me wrong. It is really brilliantly done horror film. And a lot of the traditions are drawn from actual traditions, but I could never fathom why they call her the May Queen when it is clearly a midsummer summer solstice festival. Beltane and Midsummer are separate holidays. They are separate energies. And yes, Beltane in an ancient tradition can be considered the start of summer because it was about, we've reached the zenith of spring, summer will now be commencing. But the summer solstice was much later, so there's a lot of confusion with that. Still, great movie. I really wish they would have chosen a different term or said it during Beltane if they were going to use the term May Queen. It's a nitpick, and mostly a nitpick because of my own deep connection to May Queen energy. Now, you may wonder what May Queen is the first one I think of as just deeply tied to that term. because I think we all have this idea of this is the epitome of this concept. Sorry for the jump cut there. My throat was getting very dry and I needed to get some water. Now I'm back. So you may wonder, what is the epitome of the May Queen? And it might surprise you, but actually to me, the first out of the main three Welsh Celtic fairy queens of May I think of is Guinevere. Because most people think of her as, just Guinevere. She appears in the Arthurian legends. However, she's so much more than that. She is very much this ancient fairy queen goddess, just as is Morgana Le Fay and all the other important fairy women of the Arthuriad. They're usually fairy queen goddesses. And Guinevere is so linked and tied with Beltane and May, even in the most Christianized versions of the Arthurian legends. We still always have her linked to going a-maying, which is to, go into the forest on Beltane, or really any time during the month of May, and picking flowers, singing, dancing, communing with nature. And that is just May Queen energy. Yes, Blodeuwedd holds a ton of May Queen energy, but I also think she holds so many ties to the vernal equinox because of that new blooming, the first blooms of flowers. And Rhiannon, obviously, again, a May Queen, very much so. But I think she has so much resonance with midsummer because of the solar energy. So who is in the middle? Who meets in the middle is Guinevere. Guinevere holds just this intensely May Queen energy. And she is intensely a lover energy, lover goddess type of energy, because that's what she's remembered for in the Arthuriad, is for having a lover outside of her husband. Even though I can do an entire diatribe on her as a sovereignty goddess and how Arthur was a large part of the reason why she ended up taking another lover. I'm not going to get into that here. I've talked about it a lot, and I'll talk about it a lot more, but stick to the May Queen thing. She holds that essentially lover energy. In most versions of the legends, she doesn't have children. Even though she does want them, it doesn't happen. So firmly in that lover energy, not going into that mother energy yet. So Blodeuwedd holds the mating going into the lover. Guinevere holds firmly the lover, and Rhiannon holds the lover and the mother, because she is a mother, very importantly, a mother to Pryderi in the Mabinogion. So it's this interesting thing that in May, we have that very beautiful alignment between all three of their energies coming together. And I feel it very potently. I felt it very potently for a while now. It's this alive, fertile, lush, sensual, sexual, sacred sexual energy that's really coming forward. And that is what Beltane is. It's a celebration of sensuality, of sexuality, of fertility, of abundance. It is very much so the energy of the Empress in her flower bride form. She's newly married, she's very lush and fertile and ready to become a mother. She isn't a mother yet, though, type of energy. Other Celtic, Venusian, and Welsh Celtic fairy queens that hold a little bit of the energy without being fully May Queens would be Olwen, because she is very much a flower bride. White flowers literally bloom in her footprints, which the meaning of her name is white track or white footprint for that reason. but she holds so much of a specifically maiden energy for me that I think she's not quite at that fertility energy of the May Queen yet. She's so innocent still. But we can celebrate her alongside this. We could celebrate Isolde alongside this because she is Celtic Venusian, and there's a lot of overlaps in Isolde's story and Guinevere's story, but it's just not quite aligned there. And it also must be noted that Isolde technically is an Irish princess, but her folklore comes from the Welsh Celtic lore largely, and she became Queen of Cornwall. It's very complex. And then lastly, Morgan Le Fay. Morgan Le Fay is so changeable and so misty and so tricksy. She has so many different distinct energies within her that in her Enchantress energy and her fairy lover energy, the very springtime energy, she definitely can be aligned and go into this almost May Queen zone without actually truly being a May Queen. There are even ties to Beltane in certain more modern works, like The Mist of Avalon. She conceives Mordred on Beltane at a Beltane ritual. So it's there. And then, finally, I don't know if I said finally with Morgan, but finally we have Melusine. She is very much the fertile, abundant fairy queen goddess and definitely Celtic Venus. But there's not really a distinct association between her and May Queen energy, but I definitely feel that she fits right in there. Yeah, so it's a very interesting flow between these distinct and not so distinct energies of the Celtic Venus, the May Queen, and the Flower Bride. I hope you've liked this kind of rambling video about this, and I hope you have a wonderful Beltane, and I will see you in the next video. Bye now.